Hey everyone. So here I'm today with Charles. He's an experienced data scientist. And today, obviously, he's going to introduce himself very soon. Today we're going to talk about this latest solution that Google has come out with. It's called Meridian, and it's a solution for marketing mix modeling. So if you're not familiar with marketing mix modeling, don't fret. We're going to talk about all about talk all about it in this video. So it is really in the news now. Previously also Google had a solution called Lightweight, and now it has come up with Meridian, and LinkedIn is absolutely abuzz with activity around Meridian. The marketing community in particular has started talking about Meridian in a big way, and I think it's a very good thing, especially given the fact that there's a lot of concern about the way attribution modeling is turning out now with all the limitations with regard to tracking. We know that we are moving towards a cookieless future where cookies are going to be depreciated, deprecated, and we know that Google has already taken steps towards that measure. Third-party cookies are already being phased out even as we speak. So there's a lot happening in the marketing measurement space, and MMM or marketing mix modeling is definitely coming up as a very, very important solution to this. It has been around for a long time, but it's becoming more important now with all the loopholes that are there. So, without further ado, I'll just hand it over now to Charles, and if you can just introduce yourself, Charles, quickly, and then let's talk about why Meridian and why MMM and why it's actually so popular right now, and even and also if if at all if it is worth all the hype that is generating.
Thanks. So I have a background in financial engineering and spent 10 years in investment banking before moving into marketing 6 years ago now. I am specializing myself in measurement. I want to using my financial background to make sure that what we do, there is a return on it. And so this is why I really like getting to that level to really understand what moves the needle and where our money is best spent, and also limiting the risk of spending in wrong channels. You need to be able to have a very good measurement framework to be able to answer those questions. For the first part, which is why MMM, well, MMM answers questions that other tools can't. So we talk a lot about the issue of tracking because of confidentiality issues, but we even before that, we always had issue with tracking. When you think about the user journey, there are so many steps that are not trackable. It's in between two people, a Slack channel, somebody asking to a friend, "Hey, what do you think about that product?" And also on a journey within the same user. For example, if you use dashboard outside, how do you attribute? Obviously, tracking doesn't work. And so you have to combine different solutions. And that's where MMM comes handy, is that it relies on correlation. So it doesn't need tracking. And so it's very useful to understand the impact of your upper funnel channels because, well, let's be honest, even with the best MT in the world, you can't track back the user journey to your upper funnel because there's so many things happening in the meantime. And the risk is when you use MTA solution to try to map your whole user journey, what you're going to start to do is that you're going to do initiatives that are trackable. And there's a lot of very rewarding and very profitable channels that are not trackable. And this is why it's very important. MMM comes handy because it enables us to better understand the upper funnel campaigns that are very important to spend money on. So
Right.
that's the good side of it. The bad side of it is that it relies on correlation. And so attributing more to the bottom of the funnel, there are solutions to that. You should build hierarchical model or introduce control variable, but without getting into the details, if you talk with an MMM provider, it's very important, or if you want to build in-house, it's very important to make sure that you manage that hierarchical funnel so you don't have too much attribution to the bottom side of the tracking.
Right. No, so I'm curious, like, so you talk about the problems that are there with attribution and how MMM can be a solution. So just to, if you can touch upon that for for a couple of minutes or less, why is correlation a problem? Like, why, because we actually use the word correlation all the time in the marketing space, and I'm sure that a lot of it is actually without understanding correlation properly. But Yeah, I would like to hear it from a data scientist's perspective that why correlation, just relying on it can be problematic in this context.
Yes. First of all, correlation is good. Correlation is the first step towards causation. You
Right.
need correlation to have causation. So it's the first step. The problem is when you stop there, you might have wrong signals. For example, a very simple example is if you set your marketing budget of different channels at the same time. And so you have the up, the down in spending and the up in spending happening at the same time, you have a correlation between the channel spend. When your model will try to predict the revenue from that, will have issues because the model will have issues to understand which of the channel to which is actually correlated.
Right.
Correlation also, again, back to the bottom of funnel issue, the model will always try to get to target the signal and limit the noise. Because of that, the model will always tend to attribute to the bottom of the funnel, because it's less noisy on the bottom of funnel than the upper funnel part. And there are solutions. This is why incrementality testing is needed, for example. So you have
Right.
correlation between, let's say, your YouTube and your revenue. To be sure that that correlation is causation, then you run an incrementality test.
Right. Interesting you mentioned incrementality. I just posted in about incrementality a few days, a little while back on LinkedIn as well. And I've been getting those kinds of questions from the marketing community as to why incrementality is at all important. Why can't we just rely on dashboard data or even attribution, third party attribution tools? Obviously, some of the questions are self answered by them. We as marketers, we know that there are problems with even using third party attribution tools because they, for instance, will use a pixel. They will put a pixel piece of tracking code on the website of the site of the business that's of concern. And if there's problem with the regular ad platform pixels, there's going to be problem with the pixels of the third party attribution tools as well. And then they're going to face the same kind of problems. And so we also see, by the way, that bottom of the funnel gets over attributed. This is a problem even with attribution modeling. And we see that, for instance, paid search or branded search, anything, which is more towards the end of the user journey. So we call it last click attribution. That typically tends to favor channels which are, more click oriented. So for instance, Google search, for instance. So how do you think, MMM and tool solutions like, Meridian is actually going to be able to solve it better?
First of all, you have to do a lot of work in UMMM to be able to make sure that you don't over attribute to the bottom of the funnel. It's more complicated than just running an MMM. If you just run the MMM that you have, the lightweight, the Meridian, I don't know yet, or even the PA1C one, and you don't try to control that, the model is going to look for the signal and there's less noise.
Right.
There's less noise on the bottom of the funnel. So when you use an MMM, there are two ways for the paid search problem is build a hierarchical model, which is difficult, or you just completely remove brand search from the model, and then you put search queries to control for the volume on your non-brand search. But the reason why you should remove paid search is because what you're trying to answer when we run an MMM is what has driven that revenue. A brand search a brand search never creates revenue. Like it's just like this is a problem also I saw recently of like, oh, Google is referring 80% of the traffic to your website. No, it's not. It's Google is in 80% of the case the entry to your website. It's really, really different. And if you want to measure and understand what drives the revenue, it's very important to make that difference.
Right. I think there's also a lot of talk about Bayesian inference, and I know it's a big topic, and it probably deserves like a month long series in its own right. But if you can just briefly talk about what are the key aspects of Bayesian inference, and all the difference with frequentist approach, of a very popular sort of debate in the statistics and data science space, but how it actually relates to this particular question of marketing mix modeling.
I degree in financial engineering, a decade in finance. So I was born and bred frequentist. And frequentists have two assumptions. One, that you have enough data in your data set to draw inside. And two, that all the data you need is in the data set. When you look at an MMM data set. It's weekly data over 2 years. That's 104 data points. You have very quickly 6 channels and seasonality to fit, and also change over time on the intercept. Well, I'm not going to get into the details, but there's a lot of things that a model has to model with not many data points. The other reason why Azure comes handy is that on the assumption that you have all the data you need in your data set, you probably don't, because otherwise you wouldn't need incrementality. And so Bayesian has that capability to introduce additional information into your model to be able to draw better insight. No, I'm not saying that Bayesian is better than Frequentist. There's a lot of Frequentists who are tackling those problems differently. What I'm saying is that given our situation and the framework we try to build, Bayesian makes sense.
Right. Great. So yeah, that was definitely an eye opener, and I think probably marketers will have to actually start considering the approaches, and also start consulting data scientists about it. So I think I'll speak of a personal experience from a marketing point of view, and that is with regard to a couple of ad platforms. So for instance, in Google Ads, there's something called Performance Max. Okay, so Performance Max is one of the types of campaigns that have become very popular now. And it has really replaced all kinds of shopping campaigns that used to be there earlier, like standard shopping or smart shopping campaigns. So Performance Max is kind of a catch-all campaign. It can serve in all kinds of networks. And obviously there are good things about it. It gives great results, but definitely gives great results on the dashboard. The problem is when we try to start tracking performance from Performance Max, from a new customer acquisition perspective, we see that there's a tremendous amount of over reliance on returning customers. And obviously, the reason that happens is because it goes after the low hanging fruit. Everything that can convert easily is going to go after it first. And that's why returning customers, or previous purchasers, these kind of people, retargeting audience, they will be typically the first ones the Performance Max goes after. And it therefore over attributes conversion. So people who might have, for instance, converted anyway, or they might have converted from other channels, Performance Max is going to really take credit for it. And the problem is that it's part of a multi-touch attribution model. I mean, the performance that it's showing is already through the data-driven attribution or DDA model on Google Ads, for instance. So despite that, we are actually facing that kind of an issue, that there's over attribution from Performance Max. Another problem with it is that it cannibalizes branded search greatly. So we'll see that there's actually a way to see what kind of queries that Performance Max is getting triggered for. And we see that there are a lot of branded queries involved in it. Now, obviously, from any kind of marketing perspective, it's not great to have branded and non-branded clubbed together, right? We would always want to separate them out. There are obviously very different objectives. We want to have lower, cost per click for branded terms, obviously, because these are terms that you own, right, as a brand. And there's obviously going to be much less competition around it, and also you would want not to spend a whole lot of money on it. And basically you would want it to be completely separate. And so the problem is Performance Max is also getting into that zone. So these are obviously the specific problems of the platform. I mean, there are some workarounds for it. The thing that I'm trying to get at is, and there are certain problems with Meta as well. So for instance, on Meta, there is a tremendous amount of reliance on view through attribution. Now, when we look at data from Google Analytics 4, for instance, which is another of Google's products, analytics product, we see that view through attribution is not given any importance at all. So on the one hand, there's over reliance on branded terms and retargeting audience, and then on the other hand, another kind of tool is completely overlooking the importance of view through attribution and only relying on last click. So is there a way that MMM can actually bring these things together and sort of fill in the loopholes and the gaps that we are actually finding increasingly with attribution modeling, even if we consider tracking is correct, because that's like a whole level of a problem altogether, and probably calls for a separate discussion.
I agree with even for the MMM itself, you'll have to split your brand search and your non-brand search. Like it can't be together. So if you
Right.
want to build the right MMM, you have to do that split. With the right calibration, the model will be able to better understand the measurements and reattribute that revenue back to to the upper funnel. That's the whole objective of MMM. And yes, it will be able to do that. But again, there is a lot of things to consider to be able to build your MMM. If somebody wants to build the MMM in-house and use those open source solutions that are here, like I would definitely recommend those people to have at least an expert who can guide them on the framework to build, because there are a lot
Right.
of traps that can also lead to a wrong measurement.
My understanding, hierarchical models are like are basically multi-level models, and so they're like nested data. Okay, so if I look at Facebook ads, for instance, it actually operates, and even Google ads for that matter, it operates in a nested sort of fashion.
So the hierarchical model here is for geographic. It's quite great. There's Robert who did show that it was working very well to build a hierarchical model when you have different countries. It comes very handy when you don't have a lot of data for certain countries, because then you can use it's not the average, but you can use like the trends of the other countries to define the trend of other countries. Because the assumption is that the demand will move in similar ways.
Right.
Yeah, and that paper that is on Medium showed that actually for the prediction, it's on an auto sample test, it's working very well. So that's definitely a plus for Google.
Right. So the assumption is that similar geographies will have similar kinds of characteristics, right? That's why they're sort of grouped together.
Yeah. So I summarized it in a sentence. the,
Yeah.
the methodology behind is a bit more complex than that, but that's the overall idea.
We can move on now to a slightly more complex part of Meridian and probably potentially other marketing mix modeling, which is the time varying covariate.
So I'll just simplify a bit what it means. Time varying intercept is just the sales that cannot be explained by the spend of your channel. So
Okay.
and it's time varying now. So it means that it doesn't assume that it's the same over two years, which is great because when you think about a company spending a lot of media on awareness the first year,
Right.
you should expect you should expect some revenue not attributed to marketing, because there's a bigger brand, it's a great product. People are just buying because they know the product is great. There's no impact from marketing anymore. And
Right.
this is why it's important to have that time varying effect. Because if you assume that it's the same over 2 years, well, it's just not going to work. You're just not going to be able to catch like what is not driven by marketing. And that's why it's so
Right.
the what we call the time varying covariate is the impact of your spend to your revenue. And and that's one of the issue of Google's model here, is that it doesn't fit time varying covariate. It will mean that the model will assume that the impact of Facebook, for example, will be the same over the whole period of time. And when you know the B2C, for example, you have the Black Friday, very classic. Your marketing campaigns are not going to return the same on October than in August. And so this is problematic
Right.
when you do budget modeling. And
Hmm.
that's something that PYMC can do already now. For example, you can like allocate budget based on the month. And then with the PYMC tool budget optimization, you can have an optimization for that specific month. And you'll see that the optimization will be different because PYMC does include time varying covariance.
Right. So just to understand, there aren't any ways to tackle seasonality or or cyclical patterns within Meridian.
Not for the marketing side, no.
Okay, so that is, I think, the source of the problem then, right? I mean, if they could have tackled seasonality, I think at least part of this problem could have been resolved. Am I right in thinking that way? Or
Seasonality is only one part, because you have the seasonality, but you also have where you spend your money. For example, if you have a channel called social, in social you have TikTok, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have LinkedIn, and all of those will differ. And so if the budgetary allocation change over time, but you in your MMM, you show it as one channel, because also you are limited in the number of channels you want to put in your MMM, because as I explained earlier, like you can't have too many dimensions given the 104 rows you can have. So you have to aggregate some together. And so inside this, your budget optimization will change the performance of this dimension. And this is why the covariate, time varying covariate is very important. One thing I'd like to talk is that Meridian does not handle upper funnel and lower funnel. And that's a big
Oh,
problem that you mentioned earlier in
yeah,
the
let's talk
video,
about that.
is that by doing that, you over attribute to the bottom of funnel, which tends to be Google often. And so
Right.
this is a problem also that future users of Meridian should know, is that if they don't control it, they're going to over attribute to lower channels.
Right. Great. So yeah, I think that that was a really fruitful discussion, and I think it's probably one of the first sessions. I'm sure we'll look forward to have more of these discussions and get Charles' expertise on this matter. And I think it's still early days. Meridian has not even come out with its I think code and its GitHub resources. So we are probably all still looking forward to that. I think it's basically giving it out on a like on demand basis to specific companies who are applying for it. I know I have applied for it. So yeah, I think we'll definitely catch up more and looking forward to actually have more of these discussions. And probably, this was an overarching sort of discussion. We'll probably have more detailed discussions of each of the individual aspects and maybe dive deeper and look forward to connecting more with the community. What do you say, Charles?
Yeah, it was a great chat. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for taking the time. I look forward to have another discussion.
Great. Thanks and see you soon.
See you soon. Bye.